There's a moment when someone decides to test you. It starts small, always small. A comment that cuts just a little too deep. A tone that carries something darker underneath. A look that lingers with judgment. And in that split second, everything hangs in balance. Not just what they think of you, but what everyone watching learns about how to treat you from now on. Most people feel it immediately. That violation, that sudden awareness that someone just crossed a line they didn't even know they had drawn. And their first instinct is always the same. Defend, explain, react, prove they're not what the disrespect suggested. But Machiavelli understood something they don't. Disrespect isn't about the words, it's about the test. They're not attacking your character. They're measuring your power, and if you react the way they expect, if you give them the emotional response they're fishing for, you don't just lose the moment. You lose your position in every future interaction, because once someone disrespects you and walks away unscathed, they've taught everyone watching a brutal lesson. This person is safe to disrespect. So when it happens, and it will happen, here's what you do. Not tomorrow when you've had time to process. Not later when you've cooled down. Right then, in that burning moment when your pride screams for revenge and your logic begs you to smooth things over. You go completely silent. Not the silence of shock. Not the silence of hurt. The silence of calculation. Because the person who reacts first loses control of the narrative. The person who speaks from emotion reveals their wounds. But the person who absorbs the hit and says nothing, they become something far more dangerous. They become unpredictable. This isn't ignoring it. This is something far more unsettling. You look at them. You hold their gaze without blinking. You let the weight of what they just said hang in the air like poison, and then you do absolutely nothing. You don't laugh it off. You don't defend yourself. You don't deflect with humor. You create a vacuum where their disrespect was supposed to land. Most people can't handle that vacuum. They expect pushback, explanation, maybe even anger. Those are reactions they can work with, responses they can manipulate. But when they get nothing, when their provocation dies in complete stillness, something inside them starts to crack. Did I go too far? Why isn't he reacting? What does that stare mean? What is she thinking right now? That's your first victory. Not through force, but through presence. Not through words, but through their absence. Watch what happens in the room around you. The energy shifts. People sense something different. They see someone who doesn't need to raise their voice to command attention. Someone who doesn't need to argue to establish dominance. Someone who can make the aggressor question themselves with nothing more than sustained eye contact and perfect stillness. But silence alone isn't enough. Because some people will mistake your restraint for weakness. They'll push again, testing whether your stillness was strategy or simply being caught off guard. They need to understand that your silence wasn't confusion. It was choice. So your next move must be surgical. You make them own their words. When someone disrespects you, they're banking on your emotional reaction. They want you flustered, defensive, scrambling to prove you're not what they suggested. They expect drama. They never expect to be questioned with cold precision. So you tilt your head slightly, maintain that steady gaze, and ask with perfect calm. Did you mean to say it that way? Or, you sure you want to repeat that? Or, that sounded personal. Want to clarify what you meant? Notice what's happening here. You're not denying the attack. You're not defending against it. You're inviting them to make it again, on record, in front of everyone. You're giving them rope, and most people will hang themselves with it. Because here's the truth, Machiavelli knew. The person who disrespects you isn't usually bold. They're opportunistic. They strike when they think it's safe, when they believe you won't check them. But when you meet their move with cold clarity and controlled tension, they start to doubt their position. And doubt is your weapon. The room feels it too. Everyone watching sees something they didn't expect. The aggressor, who seemed so confident moments before, now looks uncertain. Their disrespect, which felt so powerful when it landed, now hangs in the air, waiting to be justified. And you? You're not emotional. You're not rattled. You're simply waiting for them to decide how far they want to take this. Most people will back down at this point. They'll laugh nervously, claim they were joking. They'll try to smooth things over with excuses. I didn't mean it like that. You know I was just playing. Don't be so sensitive. And that's when you make your third move, the one that separates the truly powerful from those who just know how to handle a moment. You don't let them off the hook. I see, you say. Nothing more. You don't accept their retreat gracefully. You don't make it easy for them to pretend it didn't happen. You don't help them save face. You let the moment sit in uncomfortable clarity. Because Machiavelli knew that mercy given too quickly teaches the wrong lesson. If you immediately accept their excuse, their backpedal, you're telling them something. That disrespecting you has no real cost. That they can test your boundaries and then simply claim it was a misunderstanding when you push back. Your response, or calculated lack of response, becomes a statement. It says, I heard you clearly. I processed it completely. I chose not to dignify it with emotion, but I also chose not to forget it. And that's when the real shift happens. Not just in how they see you, but in how everyone sees the dynamic between you. Because you've done something rare in a world obsessed with immediate reactions and emotional displays. You've demonstrated true control under pressure. The person who tested you now realizes they've made a mistake. Not because you punished them dramatically, but because you've shown them something they didn't expect to find. Strength that doesn't need to prove itself. Power that doesn't need to be announced. Boundaries that exist whether others acknowledge them or not. But here's where most people make their fatal error. They think one moment of strength is enough. They handle the disrespect well, feel proud of their restraint, and then go back to business as usual. They smile at the person who tested them. They joke around like nothing happened. They try to be the bigger person. Machiavelli would call that emotional suicide. Because if you return to normal after setting a boundary, you're teaching them that your boundaries are temporary. You're showing them that if they wait long enough, if they test carefully enough, they can cross your lines without lasting consequence. So your fourth move is the most crucial of all. You change the relationship permanently. Not with drama, not with announcements, not with long explanations about hurt or disappointment. You simply adjust. Your warmth becomes conditional. Your availability becomes selective. Your energy, which was once freely given, now requires earning. When they speak to you, you respond with professional courtesy instead of personal warmth. When they invite you somewhere, you're suddenly busy with other priorities. When they try to joke with you, you don't laugh. You don't react negatively. That would show they still affect you. You just don't engage at the same level. This isn't pettiness. This is consequence without emotion. This is showing them that actions have results, that disrespect has a cost, that your previous warmth was a privilege they've lost access to. Your smile becomes rarer around them. Your eye contact becomes briefer. Your responses become shorter, more formal. You're not rude. You're not hostile. You're simply different. And that difference is more unsettling than any angry outburst could ever be. Because anger fades, emotion passes. But this shift in how you relate to them, this feels permanent. This feels like something fundamental has changed, and they're not sure how to change it back. And here's what happens next. Something most people never see coming. The person who disrespected you starts to panic. Not immediately, but slowly, as they realize something important has shifted. Your energy, which they took for granted, is gone. Your attention, which they assumed would always be available, has become scarce. They'll try to win it back. They'll make jokes, try to engage you, maybe even offer indirect apologies. They'll test whether the ice has melted, whether you've gotten over it, whether things can go back to how they were. And this is your most crucial test, because how you handle their attempts to return to normal determines whether you've truly shifted the power dynamic or just created temporary discomfort. You remain unmoved, not cold, not hostile, simply unmoved. Their discomfort with the new reality is not your problem to solve. Their regret about crossing your line is not your responsibility to ease. You've created a new normal, and in this normal, they have less access to you than they had before. This is perhaps the hardest part for most people, because we're trained to be accommodating, to smooth over tension, to make others comfortable. When someone seems sorry, when they're clearly uncomfortable with the distance you've created, every instinct tells you to bridge that gap. But Machiavelli understood that people only value what they can lose. And if they can disrespect you, and then immediately return to full access to your energy, time, and warmth, then they haven't lost anything. The disrespect becomes cost-free, which means it will happen again. When they realize that crossing you comes with permanent consequences, that your boundaries aren't suggestions but actual lines, they begin to understand something. You're not someone who needs their approval. You're someone who grants or withdraws access based on how you're treated. This is when your real power emerges, not power over them. That's what insecure people seek. Power over yourself. Power over your own energy, your own standards, your own presence. The power to say, through your actions rather than your words, "This is how I expect to be treated. Anything less, and you lose access to the best parts of who I am." Most people never reach this level because they are terrified of being disliked. They'd rather be disrespected by everyone than risk losing anyone's approval. But Machiavelli knew that approval from people who don't respect you is worthless. It's not real relationship, it's performance. And performance is exhausting. When you stop performing, when you stop trying to win back the people who've shown you they don't value what you bring, something interesting happens. The quality of your relationships improves dramatically. Because the people who remain, the people who earn continued access to your energy, are the ones who understand your worth without needing to test it. But there's another level to this, something deeper and more permanent than just handling individual moments of disrespect. You become someone people don't test. This is the ultimate goal. Not to handle disrespect well when it comes, but to carry yourself in such a way that it rarely comes at all. Because once you've demonstrated that disrespecting you comes with swift, permanent consequences, word spreads. Not through gossip or drama, but through energy. People can sense when someone is not to be tested. It's in how you hold yourself, how you speak, how you respond to pressure, how you handle conflict. There's a stillness about you, a centeredness that suggests crossing you would be unwise. This doesn't make you cold or unapproachable. It makes you selective. Your warmth becomes more valuable because it's not given freely. Your attention becomes more meaningful because it's not assumed. Your presence becomes more impactful because it's not guaranteed. And here's what most people don't understand about this level of presence. It's not built through aggression or intimidation. It's built through consistency, consistent boundaries, consistent consequences, consistent refusal to accept treatment that falls below your standards. Every time you handle disrespect with silent strength rather than emotional reaction, you add another layer to your reputation. Every time you withdraw access from someone who crosses your lines rather than trying to win them back, you reinforce the message that you are not to be taken lightly. Eventually, people stop testing you because they've learned, either directly or through watching how you handle others, that testing you is expensive. Not because you punish harshly, but because you remove yourself from their world so completely that they feel the absence like a physical weight. Watch how this plays out over time. In meetings, people speak to you with more consideration. In social settings, the jokes that get made at others' expense somehow never target you. In personal relationships, the casual disrespect that others endure never seems to come your way. It's not because you're intimidating. It's because you've trained people to understand that disrespecting you has a cost they're not willing to pay. And that training happened through your responses, your boundaries, your willingness to let relationships change when they needed to change. This is Machiavelli's ultimate lesson about disrespect. The goal isn't to destroy your enemies. It's to make yourself untestable, to become someone whose boundaries are so clear, whose consequences are so certain, whose self-respect is so unshakable that people naturally adjust their behavior around you. But there's a final element to this, perhaps the most important one. You must truly not need their approval. This isn't a tactic you can fake. If deep down you're still seeking validation from the people who disrespect you, they'll sense it. If you're still hoping they'll come around, still wanting them to like you, still measuring your worth by their opinion, then all the silent strength in the world won't help you. The person who can't be disrespected is the person who genuinely doesn't need to be liked by everyone. They know their value isn't determined by popular opinion. They understand that some people will never appreciate them, and they're at peace with that reality. This internal shift is what makes everything else possible. Because when you truly don't need their approval, you can enforce boundaries without guilt. You can withdraw your energy without explanation. You can maintain your standards without compromise. And when people sense that level of genuine self-possession, when they realize you're not performing strength, but actually living it, they respond differently. They speak more carefully. They consider their words before speaking. They treat you with the kind of respect that comes naturally when someone demonstrates they respect themselves. But let's go deeper, because there's a psychological element to this that most people never consider. Why people disrespect you in the first place. Understanding this changes everything. Because disrespect isn't random. It's not about you being inherently disrespectable. It's about what you signal through your energy, your responses, your boundaries. People disrespect those who they sense won't enforce consequences. They test those who seem emotionally reactive because emotional people are predictable. They push boundaries with those who they believe will accept the pushing because they need approval more than they need respect. In other words, disrespect is often an invitation, an unconscious test to see if you'll stand up for yourself. And when you fail that test, when you accept poor treatment to avoid conflict, you're unconsciously inviting more of the same. This is why some people seem to attract disrespect, while others rarely experience it. It's not about their inherent worth or value. It's about the energy they project and the boundaries they maintain. When you understand this, you realize that every moment of disrespect is actually an opportunity to demonstrate who you are, an opportunity to establish your standards, an opportunity to show the world how you expect to be treated. Most people see disrespect as something that happens to them, But Machiavelli would see it as information. Information about the person doing it. Information about the dynamic between you. Information about what needs to change. And when you start viewing disrespect as information rather than injury, your responses become strategic rather than emotional. You're not reacting to the hurt. You're responding to the data. And data-driven responses are always more effective than emotion-driven reactions. Here's what happens when you consistently apply these principles over time. You don't just handle individual moments of disrespect better. You fundamentally change how you move through the world. Your presence becomes different. People sense something solid about you, something unshakable, not aggressive, not hostile, just centered, grounded, unmovable when it comes to your standards. You start attracting different types of people. Those who respect strength, who appreciate boundaries, who value authenticity over accommodation, and you start repelling the types who are drawn to those they can manipulate, control, or disrespect without consequence. Your relationships become cleaner, less drama, less confusion, less of that exhausting dance of trying to figure out where you stand with people. Because where you stand is clear. You treat people well, and you expect the same in return. Simple. Your energy becomes more focused. Instead of wasting time managing disrespectful people, you invest in relationships that deserve your investment. And perhaps most importantly, you develop an internal compass that guides your interactions. You know immediately when someone crosses a line because you've become so attuned to your own standards. And you know how to respond because you've practiced the art of consequence without drama. This creates a feedback loop. The better you get at handling disrespect, the less you experience it. The clearer your boundaries become, the more people respect them. The more you value yourself, the more others value you too. But there's one more layer to this, something that separates those who master this principle from those who only understand it intellectually. The emotional mastery required. Because everything we've discussed requires one fundamental skill, the ability to remain emotionally centered when someone is deliberately trying to destabilize you. And that's not easy. It requires practice, patience, and a deep understanding of your own triggers. Most people's boundaries collapse the moment their emotions spike. Someone pushes the right button, says the right thing, touches the right wound, and suddenly all their self-control disappears. They react instead of respond. They defend instead of detach. They try to convince instead of simply consequence. But true power comes from emotional sovereignty. The ability to feel the hit, process the violation, and still choose your response from a place of clarity rather than reactivity. This means developing a relationship with your own anger, hurt, and pride that allows you to acknowledge these feelings without being controlled by them. It means building enough self-worth that someone else's opinion of you, even when delivered cruelly, doesn't shake your foundation. It means practicing the pause. That space between stimulus and response where choice lives. The ability to feel disrespected and still ask yourself important questions. What response serves me best here? What consequence teaches the right lesson? What boundary needs to be established or reinforced? This emotional mastery is what makes everything else possible. Because without it, you're just following tactics. But with it, you're operating from a place of genuine strength, and people can sense the difference. When your stillness comes from emotional control rather than emotional suppression, when your boundaries come from self-respect rather than defensive pride, the energy is completely different. When your consequences come from clarity rather than revenge, that energy is what creates lasting change in how people treat you. There comes a point in this process where you realize something profound. You're no longer doing this to control how others treat you. You're doing it because it's who you are. The boundaries aren't tactics anymore. They're expressions of your values. The consequences aren't punishments. They're natural results of your standards. You've become someone who simply doesn't accept disrespect, not because you're fighting against it, but because you've created a life where it has no place to land. Like water rolling off stone, disrespectful energy simply flows past you without finding purchase. This is the deepest level of Machiavelli's wisdom. True power isn't about controlling others. It's about becoming so clear in yourself, so grounded in your own worth, so consistent in your standards that the world naturally adjusts around you. And when you reach this level, when your self-respect becomes so natural and unshakable that disrespect simply bounces off you like rain off stone, you've learned something profound, something that most people spend their whole lives missing. You don't have to fight for respect when you truly respect yourself. You don't have to demand to be valued when you know your own worth. You don't have to prove you're not to be tested when your energy clearly communicates that testing you is pointless. The person who masters this becomes like gravity. They don't announce their power. They don't argue for their position. They simply exist, and everything around them adjusts accordingly. Because that's what true strength does. It doesn't push. It pulls. It doesn't demand. It attracts. It doesn't fight for space. It creates space by being itself, completely and without apology. And that person, that completely self-possessed, quietly powerful, unshakably centered person, never has to worry about being disrespected again. Not because it never happens, but because when it does, it simply doesn't matter. It bounces off and falls away, leaving them exactly as they were, centered, certain, and completely in control of their own worth. That's Machiavelli's ultimate gift. Not just tactics for handling disrespect, but a way of being that makes disrespect irrelevant. A presence so grounded in self-respect that others' lack of respect becomes their problem, not yours. And once you've claimed that level of personal power, you'll wonder why you ever cared what they thought in the first place.